Chapter 5 of Psychopomp Drive. Written by Janeen Leese-Taylor. Read aloud by SkyAsimaru. Chapter 5 The New Normal. Abby danced along the stairs, taking each one at a hop as she rose to the upper floors ahead of him. Finley followed behind her, watching the bright yellow of her trainers as they flashed by. Everything about this woman felt musical, like her buoyant movements were carried on notes and strings. Her blonde ponytail bounced with each movement of her shoulders, tapping out quiet rhythms against the base of her neck like a wide brush on a snare drum. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Finley let his hands trail up the banister, tracking her beat, and taking note of the warmth that had bled into the smooth black surface under her touch. The voices of the other occupants carried from all corners of the house like a commune or student dormitory, the shared space coming alive with companionable noise. "The hardest thing to get used to is the sleeping," the woman ahead of him noted, as she proceeded down a corridor lined with closed doors. "We work mostly at night. That means having to switch around your body clock a fair bit. We're basically nocturnal now, like owls." She ran a hand along the wall on their right, drawing invisible lines with her fingertips on the wallpaper. "It's not so bad, though. You get used to it after a while. Our dolls are able to deal with changes like that much more easily than our human bodies could."
"Do you ever get used to feeling like this?"
he asked her, waving his hands as he tried to track down the right words. The blonde woman tilted her head towards him. "Feeling like you're on a roller coaster that never slows down," she supplied. "And not really, no. Our jobs keep us pretty busy. There isn't a whole lot of downtime." When she spoke, the words tumbled loose at a brisk pace, something like a Glaswegian accent hiding beneath the cleverly schooled English one. She tucked a stray piece of hair behind one ear, giving him a sympathetic smile as they reached the very end of the corridor. "I hate to just throw you in the deep end like this, Finn, but the recently deceased, that's people like you and me, by the way, are especially vulnerable to corruption." She paused, leaning against the doorframe next to her. "We have to make sure you're prepared in case one of those fuckers comes after you on patrol."
"You think they'll really come after me?"
Finley remembered the echo of the whisperer's voice in his head, the way that it twisted and ensnared itself around his thoughts. If that happened after just 30 seconds of exposure, he didn't want to imagine what it was like to be taken in by the creature's influence. "I'm not going to lie to you, new guy. Those things out there, nothing prepares you for the first time you face them in the real world. Back there in the holding room, they've been contained for so long that their powers have weakened. But out there, in the world of the living, they have magic like you can't even imagine. And they're driven by the urge to feed." She shuddered, shifting her position against the door. "Amarini, by their very nature, contain raw spiritual energy derived from the great rivers of the dead. Imagine being the hungriest you've ever been, and you walk into a restaurant with the biggest steak you've ever seen. You'd be drawn to it too, wouldn't you?"
"I guess so,"
Finley answered uncertainly with a hum.
Can we even fight something like that?"
Abby reached out to take a hold of the doorknob by her hip, rotating it to push inside. "We can try," she replied softly. She slipped in past the threshold, and Finley followed close behind, studying the barren space with emerald eyes. The room was small and plain, with a single bed in one corner, and a mirror and sink in the other. Empty bookshelves and a wardrobe were nestled along the walls, waiting patiently for their purpose to be fulfilled. Finley reached out to touch the wallpaper, tracing lines across its rough texture.
I know it isn't much, Abby started, but I'm sure you'll fancy it up in no time.
Finley walked a circle around the room, trying not to let the dense loneliness of the small space wash over him. He ran his fingertips along an old wooden dresser and noted the dust that clung to his skin. Where did all of this come from? Abby shrugged.
The stuff's been here as long as I have, she replied. The Grimm's view of the world is a little outdated, so you'll have to forgive the old-fashioned look of the place.
Finley tapped a rhythm into the mahogany. I actually kind of like it, he said with a small smile. We had something just like this back home when I was a kid. Tall shelves had been filled to bursting with books. Glistening stickers depicting various types of cartoon animals were left, half peeling from the sides. The smell of lemon-tinged varnish and dust bunnies.
When you're feeling up to it,
Abby went on, her own green eyes meeting his as she fidgeted with the hem of her long-sleeved shirt.
Some of us like to go visit the surface to stretch our legs between jobs. We bring back all sorts of things to liven the place up a little. Pardon the expression.
She smiled, pushing back another golden bang that refused to stay in place.
Alvaro calls them our parlour, our treasures. Says we're like magpies, bringing all the shiny things home.
When he'd been alive, Thorne had always had a special fondness for counting magpies. She said they reminded her of the old buildings in the center of Chester, black and white and proud. Their tails were effervescent, coated in water-repellent oils, which shimmered blue, purple, and green when caught in the right light. He had never seen her so proud as the day she had added that photo to their mantelpiece. Yeah, I think I'd really like that, he admitted. Abigail began to retreat towards the door again, offering a sad smile that probably mimicked his own as she leaned against the frame, slowly peeling open the door.
I'm here to talk, if you need me, she offered. The others are too. The first few nights are the hardest, but it does get easier, I promise.
She was one of the few people that could understand exactly what he was going through. Even after all her years spent in the in-between, she knew that making new plans like this, new plans without the safety net of the life they had been living before, was as difficult as trying to run underwater. It was like experiencing grief in reverse. Grief for his death, grief for the ones he had left behind, grief for all of the missing opportunities that were now beyond his reach. I think I just need to get some sleep, Finley replied, running a tired hand across his face. His body felt heavy in a way that he wasn't used to. He longed for his own bed, for the comforting arms of his mattress, and the heat of Thorne's body pressed into his. The absence of her made the room around him feel unforgiving, harsh as a snowstorm in the middle of the Arctic tundra. Unsurvivable. Abby bowed her head as she backed out, pulling the door behind her with whispers of a good night on her lips. As the wooden door sealed closed, he felt a great blackness surrounding the corners of his vision. his ears starting to ring as the ceiling of his mind buckled inwards under the force of the one crushing thought. This was it. This was going to be his life from now on. A box of concrete and stone, trapped beneath the sleeping heads of a cul-de-sac full of strangers. He felt suddenly claustrophobic, like he had been buried alive, and he dropped face down onto the bed, inhaling the smell of the sheets as he hid within the soft confines of his pillow. No new smell greeted him. No laundry detergent. No previous body. Not even the scent of the materials that had been used to craft it. White and blank as unused paper, the world around him offered no sense of gravity, no belonging, and he felt himself floating completely untethered, with no clue how to ground himself. He exhaled into the thick pillow, waiting for the harsh rush of tears and emotion to overtake him. But they never did. His body shook and heaved, making its desolation known, but his eyes remained dry and brittle as old bone, mocking him without relief. He brought his knees up to his chest, turning to rest on his side with a frustrated huff. It was as if he were on an escalator with nowhere to go but relentlessly forward. No matter how much he wanted to drag his heels, fight that unending momentum, he had no choice but to move ahead. He let his eyes drift closed and pictured Thorn in his mind, drawing out every detail of her until she was fully formed within the land of his subconscious, smiling in the sunshine of their favorite shared place down by the river where the ducks and swans would gather. He wished he could reach her, touch her aching heart through the web of their connection, tell her that the corpse in the box no longer held the part of the man that she had fallen in love with. He reached out towards her side of the bed, and in the darkness of the in-between, he faded into oblivion. For a few minutes upon waking, Finley forgot that he was dead. The light that was reflected on the silvery taps of his bedroom sink felt as natural and as real as any sunshine he could remember. Then the moments of clarity grew, and the dream world faded into the past, and the taps were no longer silver but steel, and the sunshine was only the glow of a humming electrical lamp in an underground kingdom filled with the dead. The gap by his side was still cold where it lay empty, the pillow missing the dent of his girlfriend's head. He caressed it idly with the ends of his fingers, focusing on holding her there just a little longer. The thorn in his mind smiled, her eyes more turquoise than green in the morning light. She wrinkled her nose and snuggled down into the pillow, begging for another 5 minutes. Finley would have given the world for 5 more minutes. He shifted himself to the edge of the bed and stood with a soft groan of discomfort, adjusting the sheets to cover the top of the mattress behind him. He yawned and slumped towards the sink, filling it with cold water and splashing his face. Going through the motions of his morning routine, his body worked completely on autopilot.
I feel like a zombie,
he thought, then paused, raising his head to stare at his reflection.
I guess I kinda am a zombie now, huh?
Droplets of water made their way along his cheeks and chin, dripping down into the ceramic basin again and making the surface of the water dance. His green eyes were immediately pulled upwards at the sight of his new ears, resting on top of his head like black furry pyramids. The ends of the strange appendages were tipped with blonde.
Oh, okay, scratch that. A zombie cat, then.
His hair was different, too, the blonde beginning to fade to tones of silver and white. He looked odd, wrong, like the sense of uncanny valley brought on by the too realistic shop mannequin. The image in the mirror was both simultaneously him and not him. A stranger wearing his face, staring with his eyes, like seeing a long-lost twin or an aged photograph from a forgotten staff Christmas party. He reached up to touch the ears, noting how soft they appeared under the pads of his fingers. There was a firmness there in the form of the cartilage that held the organs in place and gave them their shape. He mapped around both pointed edges with his fingers, testing their flexibility and give. And curiosity killed the cat, a voice reminded him in the back of his mind, and he pulled his hands away again just as he heard a knock at the door behind him. With a tired sigh, he crossed the room and pulled open the door. The motherly Micah had her arms folded across her chest as she waited outside, her red streaks of hair bright in the electric lights. She arched a dark eyebrow at his disheveled appearance, her own feline ears turning like satellites over her head, signaling her surprise. "Dobra jutro," she greeted in Montenegrin. "You look awful. Did you get any sleep last night?" Finley stifled another yawn with the back of his hand.
I think so, he answered honestly. But it was like the second I was closing my eyes, the alarm was going off, you know?
The older woman nodded understandingly. "Are you hungry? I made a hot breakfast if you're interested." He blinked, his mouth falling open in surprise.
"You cooked breakfast?"
He felt his new ears flicker to life.
"That's very kind of you. Thank you."
She waved a hand as she started down the corridor and towards the stairs. "Ja, nimmer Timu," she teased. "Don't get used to it. I'm not your maid."
I know,
he laughed, pulling his door closed behind him, hopping to meet her descendants of the stairs. He looked around for any signs of a clock, his brain still fuzzy from sleep.
What time is it?"
"About 2 a.m., she answered. "Usually we get up around late afternoon, start patrols at 6 p.m., but it'll take your system a while to adjust. You're going to feel tired for a day or two yet, Molly." She crossed the living room and pulled out a chair at the wooden kitchen table, urging him to sit as she reached for the pan on the stovetop. He pulled himself in shyly, leaning back as she emptied something unfamiliar onto his plate. The smell was warm, distinctly umami, and he reached for the spoon on his right, dipping it into the thick mixture and bringing some to his lips. He was surprised to find it was salty, and he hummed, feeling the heat of it light up his senses as he swallowed his first bite. It was like cornmeal porridge, cooked and mushed, and he felt the pressure of his teeth catching on thick pieces of beef and carrot as he chewed, letting out a pleased moan. His stomach gurgled its appreciation. He felt like he hadn't eaten in 100 years.
This is really good.
he mumbled around his second mouthful.
I don't think I've ever eaten anything like this before.
We try our best,
Micah commented, pulling out the seat across from him and shuffling in towards her own helping.
Ingredients can be hard to come by down here, but they do what they can through our trade contacts.
She chewed and swallowed, waving her spoon in his direction as she spoke.
Sometimes we get lucky and find enough to craft something half-decent. This one is a personal favorite. Reminds me of back home.
And where exactly was home?
Finley questioned, taking another sizable bite and practically purring as the heat of it seeped into his tired bones. He hadn't even realized how hungry he was.
Boga Kotorska,
she sighed, resting her utensils down against the sides of her plate.
The Bay of Kotor. I was born and raised in a beautiful place called Risan, at the base of the Orion Mountain.
She hummed to herself, allowing her body to sink further into her chair.
I miss it sometimes. The quiet, the colors in the autumn.
She chuckled to herself.
I don't miss much the rain, though.
Yeah, I'll bet,
Finley laughed, waving around a spoonful of the warm mixture.
What about you?
Micah probed.
Salo mentioned you were a local boy.
Yep, from right here in Chester,
the younger spirit replied.
I actually only lived a few miles from here.
Oh, that must be tough.
The woman's voice was soft and empathetic.
I can't imagine.
Finley's eyes darted towards the far wall, where rows and rows of old photographs were taking up residence, clearing his throat as he changed the subject.
The others, they're from all over the place, aren't they?
Micah nodded her head, moving some of the mixture around on her plate until she was able to find more meat amongst the sauce and vegetables.
Yep, we've got half of Europe represented in our little group here.
Finley cast his green eyes around the adjoining kitchen and living room, sharp new ears listening out for other sounds around the building. He hadn't noticed how quiet it was before.
Speaking of the others, he started, are we the only ones here?
Micah swallowed.
They're out on patrol right now, but I said I'd hang back. Make sure you get yourself settled in. The first team shouldn't be too much longer. I think they went to get some of the new oranges that Karen wanted collected.
Finley's brows quirked upwards, lowering his spoon.
The Greek river god?
She smiled. The one and the same. Loves his marmalade, that one. And only fresh oranges will do. You can smell it all around the cavern when he's cooking them up. Better than a scented candle, I can tell you.
That's an unusual concept to imagine.
Finley scoffed good-naturedly.
After a few centuries in a place like this, the unusual isn't so unusual anymore. She grinned. Once you've seen a skeleton god trying to grow a mullet, all the mystique is sort of lost.
The woman raised her head as the door to the building banged open, and the forms of 3 Amarini filtered into the living room area, their arms loaded with boxes as the space buzzed with the sudden invasion of raucous laughter. The blue-haired spirit dumped one of the boxes unceremoniously onto the tabletop, the cutlery rattling as Finley jumped back in his seat.
These things are not worth the hassle,
the NB announced, shaking their head as the pair behind them tried their best to contain their laughter. The darker-skinned Amarini was wearing sunglasses to cover their eyes, but it was clear they were blushing behind the dark frames. Micah looked up at them with motherly intrigue, keeping her expression trained.
What did Ebony do this time, Scrappy?
She inquired. Abby snorted, burying her face in her hand, while Reichardt pulled off his glasses, making a show of cleaning them despite the jumping of his shoulders. Scrappy rolled their eyes behind their shades.
The problem wasn't Ebony, they grunted. It was these assholes.
Micah gave the younger spirit a knowing smile. "And did you get your tail caught in the door again?" she pressed. Scrappy flushed as the sound of the laughter exploded in the room behind them, and they threw up their hands, clearly mortified.
"I was stuck,"
they countered defensively, their voice growing tight. Their ears burned, and they stalked off to the other side of the sofa.
"And these two didn't even help. They just laughed at me."
Reichardt replaced his glasses on his nose.
"I apologize," he said gently, "but it really was amusing, Scraps, and you're in no real danger."
"I could have been. You don't know,"
Scrappy squeaked, waving their hand back towards the table.
"Besides, what sort of an example are you setting for the new guy?"
Finley raised both of his hands, trying to conceal his own laughter by chewing the inside of his lip.
Hey, leave me out of this. I'm just an innocent bystander here."
Micah waved a hand to disregard the thought, reaching down to clear Finley's plate with his quiet thanks. "We've been over this, Eric, darling. Ebony's ranch is perfectly safe. Now, please go take Karen his share before his shift ends." She raised her head from the sink again to smile at the Amarini opposite her, a playful glint in her eye. "If you hurry yourself, he just might give you another one of his recipes for the trouble." The appropriately nicknamed Scrappy, Eric, reached down to pick up one of the boxes at Reichardt's feet, their dark eyebrows dipping downwards in the semblance of a scowl on the other side of their protective shades.
"Traitors,"
they muttered, and the man next to them offered them a consolation smile, his blue eyes crinkling. "You shouldn't tease them," Micah scolded as the front door closed behind the short-haired spirit. She let the plates sink into the bubbling water as the kettle boiled next to her. "Eric is much more sensitive than you think."
"You didn't see them, Mama Micah,"
Abby quipped with a grin, pulling out the chair next to Finley and hopping into it with boisterous energy. She nudged against his shoulders, tucking her feet underneath her as she brought her chest against the chair's back.
"They were boasting about the great deals they was going to get up on the surface. How they were totally the top cat around here."
Abby's tone took a similar inflection to the other spirits, her bright eyes teasing.
"Reich was nice. He tried to warn them and everything. Told them to pull their tail in, but would Scrappy listen? No."
"A bit of harmless teasing," Reichardt supplied. "I promise it will not do her any harm, madame. It'll only, le rendre plus forte."
Micah hummed thoughtfully as she returned to the table, laying out fresh plates and cutlery for their new arrivals. "I trust your judgment here, Reich, but remember, the poor child has been through a lot in their short life. We do not need to add to their woes."
"Point taken,"
the man accepted.
"Do you need assistance with the dinner tonight?"
"Oh, no," Micah answered, shaking her head and tucking a strand of escaped hair back behind one ear. "Finley and I ate the first batch. It'll probably take me another half-hour or so to stick on the rest." The tall man reached for one of the boxes next to him, bringing it up to rest against his chest.
"Would we have time to show our newest Amarini the occupation room?"
"Yes!"
Abby cheered in agreement.
"Oh, come on, Mama Micah. Can we?"
The woman sighed good-naturedly.
All right, but Silo wanted Finley to be ready for the last patrol at 6 a.m. There have been some reports of assaults near the old Countess Park that he wanted to check out.
More corruptors? Reich noted thoughtfully. Thus the 4 sightings this week.
We'll make sure to have him back in time, Abby interrupted as she heaved one of the boxes up towards her left shoulder. Hey, Finn, could you be a pal and grab the other one there for me? Finley was surprised to find that the box felt almost weightless in his arms, his new muscles barely exerting themselves to lift the heavy object. The artificial body he was in, the thing the others had called a doll, still felt alien. There was a machine-like efficiency that made him feel detached from it, like he was simply a passenger along for the ride, a brain traveling around in a suit of armor. He continued on after the others, detecting a noticeable drop in temperature as they moved further back into the pantry. Around them, metal shelves were stacked with different types of raw ingredients. Everything from fish to figs were neatly arranged and labeled with an elegant looped note. You can blame Reich here for the colourful catalogue, Abby teased, pressing her box onto one of the shelves marked fruit. I've never seen someone love labels as much as this guy.
There is nothing wrong with being organized, Reichardt rebuked, wagging his tail behind him as he added his own box to the collection on the shelf. How else would you expect to find anything in here?
I don't know, Abby answered. How do people normally find stuff? Just rummage around a bit.
Rummage around a bit,
Reichardt repeated slowly, his tone incredulous.
However did you survive in the living world?
With street smarts, Abby retaliated.
The taller spirit responded disbelievingly. Abigail folded her arms around her chest, leaning against one of the shelves and rocking its contents.
Besides, we're dead now, so what does it matter? She chuckled to herself. We could eat cake every day and never get sick.
And your door would not function as it should, Reichardt scolded. Need I remind you, Abigail, that a balanced diet
is required to make the door work most efficiently, yada yada,
the young woman droned, and reached out to pat the side of Finley's arm as he slid his own box onto one of the metal shelving units.
You agree with me, right, Finley? Cake for breakfast, lunch and dinner?
Finley chuckled under his breath, reaching down to pat his quickly numbing fingers against the sides of his trousers.
I think cake might lose its appeal if we ate it all the time. See?
Reichardt arched a dark eyebrow.
Finally someone else here sees sense.
Abigail pouted.
I'm surrounded by crabbed old spoil sports, she whined,
tossing her hands up in defeat.
Come on then, at least you guys can't possibly ruin the occupation room for me.
She walked back towards the narrow doorway, and Reichardt shook his head fondly as he watched her go, his long black tail drawing circles behind his back.
We had better follow her, he said, before she comes back with something much sharper than that tongue of hers.
Finley tipped his head in the direction of the door.
Lead the way, then,
he said, and tailed after the pair as they returned to the warmth of the rest of the house, closing the storeroom door behind him. To be continued in Chapter 6.